He said, black families were better during Jim Crow. She said, is that because of your history or your white wife? And just like that, the silence inside Black America shattered. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This wasn't a misquote. This was a sitting congressman, a black man standing on a national stage, telling millions that the era of lynchings, chains, and segregation somehow had value, and the woman who fired back, she didn't whisper. She roared. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't come to be polite. She came to reclaim truth from the mouths that tried to rewrite it. Two black leaders, two different Americas, one stage, and a storm so real, it didn't end when the cameras shut off. Now we ask, when our own speak against our pain, do we stay silent out of loyalty? Or do we rise in the name of legacy? Stay with us, because this isn't just another headline, it's the voice our grandmothers were never allowed to raise. Subscribe and stay, because silence no longer protects us. It was supposed to be a routine. A quiet evening segment on America at the crossroads. Talking points, policy comparisons, a few respectful exchanges before the next commercial break. But the producers knew, the audience knew, the country knew this wasn't going to be polite, because sitting across from each other were two of the most outspoken voices in the black political landscape. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas and Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida. They didn't come to agree. They came to claim the soul of a people. The host barely finished his introduction when the atmosphere shifted. Eyes narrowed, shoulders squared. Jasmine Crockett leaned into her mic like a blade being unsheathed. Congressman Donalds, she began. You said, and I quote, black families had more structure during Jim Crow. Owen, you mean during the era of lynchings, of forced segregation, of mass incarceration beginnings? Donalds, calm, unbothered, nodded. Yes, I said that, and I stand by it. During that time, our communities were tighter, families intact. We weren't dependent on government. Jasmine blinked once. Sharp, focused. So you're telling millions of black Americans that the era of racial terrorism was somehow good for us? No, he replied. I'm saying that despite what was happening outside our doors, what we built inside our homes was strong. The audience, watching across the nation, leaned in. They knew what was coming next. Are you saying that from memory? Congressman, Yasmin asked, or from proximity? He frowned. Proximity. She didn't hesitate. Proximity to whiteness. Because when you speak like this with such ease, I wonder if it's your history you're remembering, or the world you married into. Boom. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. Donald's jaw clenched not from anger, from restraint. So because my wife is white, I've lost my blackness. I didn't say that. She fired back. I said your lens may have shifted. You walk through doors now that many of us still get locked out of. And maybe, just maybe, if you got how heavy those doors were, the host tried to interject a raised hand, ignored. You think Jim Crow gave us pride? She said. My grandfather kept a notebook, names of black men who vanished from his town. That was structure. That was values. Donald leaned forward. You think I forgot where I came from? He said, voice dropping. I grew up in Crown Heights. My cousins did time. My friends never made it to 20. Don't lecture me about memory. She matched his gaze, then stopped speaking. Like pain is strategy, you didn't inherit struggle to turn it into talking points. The tension was no longer political. It was generational, personal, cultural. This was two truths colliding, both born black, both elected, both battle-tested, but split down the middle by how they define survival. Do you know what happens? Jasmine said quietly. When a black man on national television says Jim Crow had benefits I didn't say it had benefits. He snapped. I said we had strength. And do you know how many children heard that and thought, maybe it wasn't so bad? The air was thick. Not a single crew member moved. The control room was silent. You're not just a congressman. She said, you're a symbol. And symbols carry weight. Donald sat back, calm on the outside, but the fire in his eyes said everything. And what are you? He asked. She didn't blink. I'm the voice of the ancestors who didn't get a microphone. Before the studio lights even cooled, the moment was already viral. Twitter exploded first, then Facebook, then TikTok. By midnight, clips of Jasmine Crockett and Byron Donalds had racked up over 10 million views. Headlines rolled in like waves. Crockett versus Donalds. The battle over black identity. He mentioned Jim Crow. She mentioned his wife. 2 Black Americas. 1 national meltdown. And just like that, a single conversation had divided the country and Black America most of all. In barbershops, beauty salons, backyards. Everyone had something to say. Some called Jasmine a truth teller. She said, what we've been biting our tongues about for years. About time. Someone challenged these safe black voices in power. Others were furious. She went too far. You don't bring a man's wife into it. That wasn't brave, that was cruel. In a South Carolina living room, a grandmother turned to her daughter and said, she reminded me of Fannie Lou Hamer. Not afraid, not ashamed. Meanwhile, a college student in Ohio tweeted, you don't gain points for dragging a black man on live television. Especially not in front of them folks. On Instagram, split-screen memes spread like wildfire. Jasmine on one side, Byron on the other. Captioned, 2 truths. One nation, still divided. For Byron, the blowback came fast and personal. His phone lit up with texts. One from his wife, Marlene, call me. I'm fine. Just saw it. Another from an old fraternity brother. You know they're coming for you. Brace up. The conservative blogs framed it one way. Democrat attacks black. GOP rep over interracial marriage. Progressive creators spun it. Another. Crockett drops a masterclass on black authenticity. But neither side told the whole truth. Because inside their homes, both politicians were reeling back in her hotel room. Jasmine sank onto the edge of her bed. Her aide, Dana, stood at the window, glued to her phone. You're trending. Number 2. Nationwide. What's number 1? Jasmine asked, not looking up. Your name. She exhaled. Long. Deep. The kind of breath that comes when adrenaline turns to ache. Across town, Byron sat in silence in a black rental car. The Capitol Dome shrinking behind him. His assistant read off his calendar. Heritage Foundation confirmed. Jacksonville on Thursday. They ask you to avoid the family values line if possible. He didn't respond. He scrolled. He read and read until he landed on a comment that stopped him cold. You married a colonizer, and now you talk like one. In one sentence, years of sacrifice, service, and struggle were reduced to who he loved. Backstage, both of them were hurting. But on screen, the world was hungry for more. Jasmine's office was flooded with calls, some thanking her, others demanding she apologize. One voicemail hissed, "Keep your mouth off, good black men." Another read, simply, "You carried our pain. Thank you." Meanwhile, students in Detroit debated the moment in classrooms. A teacher in Tulsa paused her civics lesson to play the clip a teenager in Harlem posted. They're not just fighting each other. They're fighting for who gets to speak for us. And that was the truth. This wasn't just a spat. This was a rupture in how we define loyalty, identity, and legacy. And while commentators were scrambling for sound bites, black families were sitting down for the first real conversations they'd had in years. One question echoed, louder than all the noise. If you believe this is what black America needed all along, "Say truth" in the comments below. By sunrise, the fire hadn't died down. It had spread. Every major network ran the clip. Morning shows, political panels, even late-night comedians had weighed in, but inside two very different homes, the aftermath felt quieter and heavier. In Dallas, Jasmine Crockett sat at her kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold black tea. Her phone buzzed endlessly, buried beneath a folder marked 2025 Housing Equity Bill. She hadn't picked it up all morning. A framed photo of her parents sat by the window. Her father, a Louisiana bricklayer, marched in the 62nd. He was 15, arrested twice. He never talked about it like he was a hero. He just said, "We did what we had to." Across the country, in Naples, Florida, Byron Donalds walked a stretch of shoreline with his wife Marlene. Neither of them had slept much. She broke the silence first. "I don't need you to defend me," she said, her voice even. "But you can't pretend that didn't hit our house." Byron nodded. Slow. "Somebody asked you if you felt responsible for my disconnect." "That's what they said." "Their word?" She confirmed. "But I felt it." He exhaled. The kind of exhale that carries disappointment, not just in others, but in yourself. "I didn't even mention you," he said, but they ran with it anyway. "Because pain doesn't wait for permission to feel offended," she replied. "And love doesn't cancel out public perception." He looked out at the tide and realized, in trying to speak about strength, he'd made his own home feel vulnerable. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Jasmine's office filled with sound. Calls, interviews, demands. Dana read from a list. "Charlemagne wants you on his podcast. CNN wants a one-on-one. Candace Owens' team is asking if you'll do a face-off." Jasmine didn't move. "Did I cross the line?" Dana paused, chose her words. "You hit a nerve. That's not always wrong, but it's not always right either." Elsewhere, America kept choosing sides. In a Jackson community center, a group of high school seniors held a debate. Does lived experience justify hard truths? Half chose Crockett, half chose Donalds. But for the first time in that program's history, not one student stayed silent. In Sacramento, a family cookout went from ribs to rage. She was out of line. "You don't bring someone's wife into it," Gerald said, scrolling his phone. "No, baby," his Aunt Regina shot back. He crossed the line when he made Jim Crow sound like Black America's glory days. The conversation was no longer about two politicians. It was about who gets to speak, for whom, what qualifies as betrayal, what we're allowed to remember, and what we're supposed to forget. That evening, Jasmine walked a quiet hallway inside the Capitol. Heels clicking, thoughts loud. She turned a corner, and there he was. Byron, standing, waiting. They stopped. "You got a second?" he asked. She nodded. They stepped into a side room, neutral ground. "I didn't mean to question your family," she said, first, "but I had to question what you said. And I didn't mean to glorify oppression," he replied. "I was trying to talk about what we lost. Maybe I didn't say it right." She considered that, or maybe you said it exactly how you felt. But feelings, even honest ones, can still cause damage. He looked at her. "So what now?" She sighed. "Now we deal with the aftermath." But the truth, the aftermath had only just begun. And neither of them, no matter how brave, no matter how sharp, could control what the nation was going to do next. 2 days later, the firestorm hadn't faded, but something had changed. Not in the headlines, not on talk shows, but in the air. In Birmingham, Alabama, a small church swelled with silence as Pastor Reginald Knox took the pulpit. "We're watching two people fight over a mirror," he said slowly, each holding it to the other, saying, "Look at what you've become. That's..." But nobody wants to look at themselves. In Sacramento, a high school sophomore told her, "Civics teacher, They weren't just arguing. They were showing us what it means to hurt and still try to speak. And in Washington, something happened that no one expected. Jasmine Crockett and Byron Donalds met again. Not on television, not in front of cameras, but on the steps of the Library of Congress by accident or fate. No one could tell. She was adjusting her mic for an interview with CNN. He was walking out from his own. They locked eyes. No staffers, no producers, no stage managers. You up next? He asked. Voice even. Just wrapping up. She replied. A pause. I read your statement. He said. I don't agree with all of it, but I respected it. Her eyebrow rose. And yours. Short, but clear. Another silence, but softer now. I think people want us to hate each other. She said, some of them need us too. He answered, if we don't, they lose their headline. She stared at the Capitol behind him, tall, white, unwavering. You were right about something, she admitted. We are too quick to tear each other down. He blinked, then nodded. And you were right, too, he said. Pain doesn't belong in museums. It's still living in bones, in breath. You didn't forget, she said. You just didn't say it out loud. For the first time since their clash, they weren't trading barbs. They were building a bridge, a fragile one, but real. They both smiled. Not the politician smile. The other kind, the tired, human kind. You still need to read more history, she teased. And you're still allergic to nuance, he replied. They laughed. Softly. It wasn't unity. It wasn't surrender, but it was a beginning. Later that night, the internet didn't know what to do with it. Wait, did they just talk? No shade. No drag. Just dialogue. Confused. Curious. Unsettled people began to respond. A woman in Memphis tweeted, my dad was like Donald's. My mom like Crockett. I never thought I'd see their worlds meet. This hit hard. A high school senior in St. Louis wrote, I showed my grandma the clip. She just whispered, maybe we'll be okay. Somewhere in Baton Rouge, an old man named Terrence Callow pulled his grandson aside. When I was your age, we didn't have politicians who talked to each other like that. He said, they didn't have to agree, but they had the guts to feel. His grandson asked, do you think they really listened to each other? Terrence paused. They tried. That's more than most. And maybe that was enough for now. By the weekend, the noise began to slow, but it didn't disappear. It seeped into places quieter than Twitter, deeper than a cable segment. It made its way into living rooms, Sunday sermons, and late-night conversations between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. Something had shifted. The moment between Crockett and Donalds wasn't just a television clash. It was a reflection not of who was right or who was louder, but of who we are as a people trying to remember, to survive, and to grow. In Baton Rouge, a retired steelworker named Terrence Callow sat on his porch with his grandson. You saw that thing with the congresswoman and the fella, he asked. The boy nodded. It's everywhere. Terrence leaned back, his voice steady. Back in my day, folks didn't get on television and tell the truth like that, not if they wanted to keep their jobs. His grandson tilted his head. You think they told the truth? I think they told their truth. And sometimes that's enough to shake something loose. In Philadelphia, a church choir paused mid-rehearsal to talk about it. A tenor said, they made us look bad arguing like that. But the choir director raised her hand. They made us look real. And sometimes, real ain't pretty. In Jasmine Crockett's district office, the phones hadn't stopped ringing. Some callers thanked her. You spoke for us, the ones who still remember what Jim Crow did to our grandmothers. Others condemned her. You embarrassed yourself. And us. One email reads simply, truth hurts, but silence hurts more. Jasmine read every message, not because she needed validation, but because she needed to know if it mattered. She sat quietly one morning, staring at a photo of her father, arrested at 15 in Louisiana for marching. He used to say, "We fought so our kids wouldn't have to whisper their pain." That day, she whispered her own truth into a voice memo. We cannot protect our people by pretending history was gentler than it was. Across the country, in a Florida community center, Byron Donalds was facing a town hall of mostly black elders. One woman stood up. "You remind me of my son. Smart, polished, strong. But sometimes I think y'all forget the scars we wear under our Sunday best." Byron lowered the mic. "I don't forget," he said. "I just carry it different. Maybe too quiet. Maybe too proud. But I carry it all the same." There was no applause, just nods, and a long, thoughtful silence. On Capitol Hill, the clip had stopped trending, but the ripples remained. Colleagues who'd stayed quiet were now asking Jasmine, "How do we have hard conversations that don't turn into war?" Byron began sitting in on roundtables. He used to avoid even when he knew he'd be outnumbered. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to understand. Because underneath the sound bites, the headlines, the firestorms, something rare had happened. Two people had spoken, had listened, had stayed in the room. And that's more than most. What they gave us wasn't just commentary. It was permission to speak our own truth, to be uncomfortable, to be seen, even in conflict. And if that's all we walk away with, it's still enough to start again. What Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Byron Donalds gave us wasn't just a headline, it was a turning point. They showed us that pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it stands calmly in a studio, wrapped in policy and posture, until someone dares to name it. They didn't settle their differences. They didn't need to, because what they did was bigger. They reminded Black America of the questions we've been carrying for generations. Who gets to speak for us? Who do we silence to keep the peace? And when the truth hurts, do we still tell it anyway? Congresswoman Jasmine, latest news may not trend next week, but her voice, firm and unwavering, left a mark not just on her opponent, but on a nation starving for honesty. And what happened on that stage, it wasn't a collapse. It was a crack, letting light in. In that light, we saw two people, not parties, not stereotypes, not memes. Two souls, shaped by history, holding their ground and holding a mirror. Because the United States Congress latest news shouldn't just be about votes and bills. It should be about the courage to confront, to listen, to grow. Somewhere tonight, a grandmother is telling her grandson, "Baby, don't you ever be afraid to speak your truth, even when the room shakes." Somewhere else, a Black veteran is watching the clip and whispering, "We fought for that right to speak, even when it's hard." This story isn't over. It's a seed, and seeds need space to break before they bloom. So ask yourself, what conversation have you been too afraid to start? What part of your truth have you silenced to protect someone else? If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, stand, subscribe, because they silenced our voices long enough. Let's raise them louder than ever. Justice Rising. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story. The kind they still don't want you to hear.